Marcus Donovan never believed in fate until the night he showed up to the wrong job at the wrong time and met someone who would change everything he thought he knew about his own past. The fluorescent lights of the Riverside Medical Center flickered. As Marcus pushed through the employee entrance at 10:47 p.m., 13 minutes late for what he thought was his first night shift in the custodial department, his work boots squeaked against the polished linoleum as he fumbled with the ID badge that felt foreign clipped to his Navy uniform shirt. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. 3 months of unemployment had stripped away whatever pride Marcus had left. At 34, with 2 kids and a mortgage that seemed to grow larger every month while his bank account shrank, he'd take any job that would pay, even if it meant scrubbing hospital floors while the rest of Cleveland slept. The supervisor who'd hired him, a stern woman named Janet Morrison, had mentioned something about orientation on his first day. But the details were fuzzy in Marcus's exhausted mind. Between dropping off resumes during the day and picking up his kids from after-school care, sleep had become a luxury he couldn't afford. Marcus wandered through the maze of hospital corridors, looking for the custodial office. The building seemed different at night. Shadows stretched longer, sounds echoed strangely, and the usual bustle of daytime activity had settled into an eerie quiet, broken only by the distant beeping of machines and the soft padding of nurses' shoes. He turned a corner and nearly collided with a woman in scrubs who was wheeling a cart of medical supplies. She looked up at him with tired eyes that seemed to carry the weight of too many double shifts. "You lost, honey?" she asked, her voice carrying a hint of southern accent that reminded Marcus of his grandmother. "Looking for the custodial office?" Marcus replied, holding up his ID badge.
"First night?"
The woman, whose name tag read Beverly Chen, RN, squinted at his badge in the dim hallway light. Her expression shifted from helpful to confused. "Custodial. Sugar, that badge says you're with patient transport." Marcus felt his stomach drop. He looked down at the badge, the same one Janet Morrison had handed him during their brief meeting in what he now realized might not have been the custodial office at all. The words Patient Transport Services were clearly printed beneath his name and photo. There must be some mistake, he started, but Beverly was already shaking her head with a knowing smile. "A mistake happens more often than you'd think. People get turned around in this place, end up in the wrong department. Come on, I'll show you where you need to be." As they walked through the winding corridors, Beverly explained that patient transport was responsible for moving patients between departments from their rooms to surgery, from surgery to recovery, from the emergency department to radiology. It was more responsibility than Marcus had bargained for, but the pay was the same, and he couldn't afford to be picky. "The work's not easy," Beverly continued as they rode the elevator to the basement level where the transport department was housed. "You'll be on your feet all night, dealing with patients who are scared, families who are worried, and medical staff who are stressed. But it's good work, important work." The transport office was a cramped space filled with wheelchairs, gurneys, and the lingering smell of industrial disinfectant. A handful of other transport workers were gathered around a small table, playing cards and sharing stories from their shifts. They looked up as Beverly and Marcus entered. "Got another one who took a wrong turn," Beverly announced. The group chuckled apparently. This was a common occurrence. A heavy-set man with graying hair and kind eyes stood up from the card table. His name tag identified him as Robert Tanner, transport supervisor. "Marcus Donovan?" Robert asked, consulting a clipboard. "We've been expecting you. Janet Morrison from HR called down about an hour ago and said you might be running late." Marcus nodded, still processing the fact that he'd somehow ended up in the wrong job entirely. But Robert's easy manner and the welcoming atmosphere of the transport team made him feel less anxious about the mix-up. "Let me show you the ropes," Robert said, handing Marcus a small radio and a hospital map. "First thing you need to know is that every patient you transport is someone's family. Could be someone's mother, father, child, or spouse. They're scared, they're hurting, and sometimes you're the only friendly face they'll see during their visit. Here." Robert led Marcus through the basics, how to operate the wheelchairs and gurneys, how to read the transport requests that came through on the computer system, how to navigate the hospital's complex layout, and most importantly, how to interact with patients and their families. The technical stuff you'll pick up quick, Robert explained as they walked through a practice run from the emergency department to the radiology wing. But the human part, that's what makes the difference. A smile, a kind word, just letting people know they're in good hands. That's what this job is really about. Marcus found himself thinking about his own experiences in hospitals. When his daughter Emma had broken her arm last year, he remembered how anxious he'd felt waiting in the emergency room, not knowing what to expect. The transport worker who'd wheeled Emma to get her X-rays had cracked jokes and made her laugh despite the pain. It was a small gesture, but it had meant everything to Marcus in that moment. By midnight, Marcus was making his first solo transport. The request came through the computer system: take a patient from room 314 to the cardiac catheterization lab on the second floor. He checked the patient information. Eleanor Walsh, age 68. Scheduled for an early morning procedure. Room 314 was in the cardiac wing, where the atmosphere felt heavier somehow. Families clustered in waiting areas with cups of coffee that had long gone cold, their faces etched with worry. Marcus knocked softly on the door of room 314 before entering. Eleanor Walsh was a petite woman with silver hair and bright blue eyes that seemed to alert for someone facing heart surgery in a few hours. She was sitting up in bed, fully dressed, except for the hospital gown. Reading a paperback novel by the light of the bedside lamp. Mrs. Walsh. I'm Marcus. I'm here to take you down for your procedure. Eleanor looked up from her book and smiled. It was the kind of smile that seemed to light up the room despite the circumstances. Well, hello there, Marcus. I was wondering when you'd arrive. I've been ready for an hour, but you know how these things go. As Marcus helped Eleanor into the wheelchair, she continued chatting in a way that put him at ease. She told him about the book she was reading, asked about his family, and commented on how different the hospital looked at night compared to her afternoon visits with her cardiologist. You're new, she observed as they made their way down the corridor. I can tell. You've got that careful way of moving, like you're still learning the geography of this place. Marcus chuckled. Is it that obvious? Oh, honey, I've been coming to this hospital for 20 years. I know all the regular transport folks. Plus, you've got that nervous energy of someone on their first night. They rode the elevator down to the second floor in comfortable conversation. Eleanor asked about Marcus's children, and he found himself telling her about Emma's love of soccer and his son Tyler's obsession with building elaborate structures out of LEGOs. Sounds like you've got your hands full, Eleanor said as they approached the cardiac lab. Yeah, but in the best way possible, Marcus replied, realizing it was the first time in months he'd talked about his kids, without the underlying stress of wondering how he was going to provide for them seeping into his voice. The cardiac lab was a sterile, high-tech environment that felt worlds away from the warm conversation he'd been having with Eleanor. As he helped her onto the examination table, she reached out and squeezed his hand. Thank you, Marcus. You've got a gift for making people feel comfortable. Don't lose that. Walking back through the empty corridors, Marcus reflected on Eleanor's words. In his previous job at the manufacturing plant, he'd been just another pair of hands on the assembly line. Here, in just one brief interaction, he'd made a difference in someone's day. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. The rest of the night passed in a blur of transport requests. Marcus moved a teenager with a broken leg from the emergency department to orthopedics, transported an elderly man from his room to the imaging center for a late-night CT scan, and helped a worried mother accompany her infant son to the pediatric intensive care unit. Each interaction was different, but they all had something in common. Marcus found himself naturally connecting with the patients and their families. A joke here, a reassuring word there, a steady presence during moments of uncertainty. He began to understand what Robert had meant about the human part of the job being the most important. Around 4 a.m, during a brief lull in transport requests, Marcus found himself in the hospital cafeteria with a cup of coffee and a sandwich from the vending machine. The cafeteria was mostly empty, except for a few nurses grabbing quick meals. Between shifts and a maintenance worker mopping the floors, he thought about the chain of events that had led him here. If Janet Morrison hadn't been unclear about which department he was joining, if he hadn't gotten lost in the hospital corridors, if Beverly Chen hadn't pointed him in the right direction, he might be spending his first night emptying trash cans and mopping floors. Instead of discovering this unexpected sense of purpose, Marcus pulled out his phone and looked at a photo of Emma and Tyler from their last trip to the zoo. They were grinning at the camera, ice cream smeared on their faces. Completely unaware of their father's financial struggles. In a few hours, he'd go home, catch a few hours of sleep, and then pick them up from school like he did every day. Tonight felt different. Tonight, for the first time in months, he felt like he was moving forward instead of just surviving. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you were enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The radio on his belt crackled to life with another transport request. Room 57 to the emergency department. Marcus finished his coffee, checked the room number on his hospital map, and headed back into the maze of corridors that were slowly becoming familiar. Room 57 was in the medical wing, where patients with various internal 5-2 conditions were treated. As Marcus approached the room, he could hear voices of a woman speaking in urgent, hushed tones to someone on the phone. He knocked and waited for permission to enter. The voice on the phone said a quick goodbye and then called out, "Come in." Patient was a woman in her early 40s, with short dark hair and tired eyes. She was dressed and sitting on the edge of the bed, a small overnight bag at her feet. But something about her expression caught Marcus's attention. She looked like someone who just received devastating news. "I'm Marcus from Patient Transport," he said gently. "I'm here to take you down to the emergency department." The woman looked up at him, and for a moment, her composure seemed to crack. She took a shaky breath and nodded. "I'm Sarah. Sarah Mitchell." She paused, as if trying to find the words for something difficult. They're moving me to the emergency department because my condition is more serious than they initially thought." Marcus had been trained not to ask too many questions about medical conditions that wasn't his role. But something in Sarah's voice, the way she said it, made him want to offer whatever comfort he could. "I know it's scary," he said, as he helped her into the wheelchair. "But the emergency department has the best doctors in the hospital. You're going to be in good hands." As they made their way through the corridors, Sarah was quiet, lost in her own thoughts. Marcus didn't push for conversation, but he made sure to take the smoothest route possible, avoiding the bumps and sudden turns that might make the ride uncomfortable. They were almost to the emergency department when Sarah spoke again. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course. You ever feel like life has a way of putting you exactly where you need to be, even when you think you're lost?" Marcus thought about his own night, how he'd ended up in the wrong job and discovered something that felt more right than anything he'd done in years. "Yeah," he said. "Actually, I do." Sarah was quiet for another moment, then said, "I was supposed to be discharged this morning. Was looking forward to going home, getting back to my normal routine. But then the blood work came back and everything changed. And now I'm scared, and I don't know what's going to happen." They'd reached the emergency department, but Marcus didn't immediately wheel Sarah inside. Instead, he came around to face her, crouching down so they were at eye level. "Can't tell you that everything's going to be okay," he said. "But I can tell you that you're stronger than you know, and whatever happens, you don't have to face it alone. The doctors and nurses here, they're not just doing a job. They care about what happens to you." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she managed a small smile. "Thank you, Marcus." I needed to hear that. As Marcus wheeled Sarah into the emergency department and helped her get settled, he realized that Robert had been right about the human part of the job being the most important. In just a few hours, he'd learned that sometimes the smallest gesture's a smile. A kind word, a moment of genuine connection, could make the biggest difference in someone's day. The night shift was winding down, and Marcus had one more transport request before his shift ended. As he walked back through the hospital corridors, he felt something he hadn't felt in months, a sense of belonging, purpose, of being exactly where he was supposed to be. He had no idea that his real test was still to come, or that his journey through the wrong door would lead him to discover something about his past that would change everything he thought. He knew about the power of a simple smile, The next 3 weeks at Riverside Medical Center transformed Marcus in ways he hadn't expected. Each shift brought new faces, new stories, and new moments where his presence seemed to matter more than he'd ever imagined possible. The financial pressure at home remained constant. Bills still arrived with threatening red stamps, and his savings account balance still made his stomach clench. But something fundamental had shifted in how he approached each day. Marcus developed routines that helped him navigate the complex emotional landscape of hospital work. He learned to read the subtle signs that distinguished a routine transport from one where a patient needed extra reassurance. The way someone gripped the armrests of their wheelchair, the tension in their shoulders, the particular silence that came with receiving difficult news, these became his vocabulary for understanding unspoken needs. On a Tuesday night that started like any other, Marcus received a transport request that would test everything he'd learned about the delicate balance between professional distance and genuine care. The computer screen displayed minimal information. Jessica Palmer, age 29, room 418, to oncology consultation. Urgent priority. Room 418 was in the maternity wing, which immediately struck Marcus as unusual. Oncology consultations typically originated from other departments. As he made his way through corridors lined with cheerful murals of storks and rainbows, the cognitive dissonance of the situation settled uncomfortably in his chest. Jessica Palmer was alone when Marcus knocked on her door. She sat in the recliner beside her hospital bed, staring out the window at the parking lot 4 floors below. The room showed signs of recent occupancy: flowers on the windowsill, a collection of greeting cards on the bedside table, and a pink balloon that bobbed gently in the air conditioning. "Mrs. Palmer, I'm Marcus from Patient Transport." Jessica turned toward him, and Marcus was struck by how young she looked. 29, according to the computer. But her face held the kind of exhaustion that seemed to age and youthten her simultaneously. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wore a hospital gown under a cardigan that looked hand-knitted. "The oncology appointment," she said, her voice flat. "Right." As Marcus prepared the wheelchair, Jessica moved slowly, as if each motion required conscious thought. She settled into the seat with a careful precision that suggested recent surgery or ongoing pain. "How are you feeling today?" Marcus asked as they began moving through the corridor, though he immediately regretted the generic nature of the question. Jessica was quiet for so long that Marcus thought she might not answer. Then, as they waited for an elevator, she spoke. 3 days ago, I was planning my daughter's first birthday party. Today, I'm going to talk to a doctor about whether I'll live to see her again." The elevator doors opened, and they rode in silence to the oncology floor. Marcus felt the inadequacy of any response he might offer, but he also sensed that Jessica needed the space to process. Whatever was happening in her world, the oncology waiting area was different from other parts of the hospital. The chairs were more comfortable, the lighting softer, and there were puzzles and magazines scattered on tables in an attempt to create normalcy in a place where normal had ceased to exist for most people who found themselves there. Marcus helped Jessica transfer from the wheelchair to one of the waiting room chairs. As he was about to leave, she reached out and touched his arm. "Thank you for not trying to tell me everything will be okay," she said. "I'm so tired of people saying that when they don't know." Walking back to the transport office, Marcus couldn't shake the image of Jessica sitting alone in that waiting room. He'd transported hundreds of patients over the past 3 weeks, but something about her situation, the contrast between where she'd been and where she was going, stayed with him. Later that night, during his dinner break, Marcus found himself in the hospital chapel. He wasn't particularly religious, but the space offered quiet that was hard to find elsewhere in the building. He sat in one of the back pews, thinking about Jessica and wondering what news she was receiving in the oncology consultation. The chapel door opened and Beverly Chen entered, looking as tired as Marcus felt. She nodded at him and sat in a pew across the aisle. "Rough night?" she asked. "Yeah. Transported a young mother to oncology earlier. Can't stop thinking about her." Beverly was quiet for a moment. "Jessica Palmer." Marcus looked at her in surprise. "You know her?" I was her nurse when she delivered her daughter 3 months ago. Complicated pregnancy, but everything turned out fine, or so we thought. Beverly's expression was heavy with the weight of knowledge she couldn't share due to patient privacy. Some stories just stick with you, you know? They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Beverly spoke again. You're good at this job, Marcus. I've been watching how you interact with patients. You have something that can't be taught. What's that? You see people? Really see them? Not just as transport requests or medical cases, but as human beings. Having the worst or scariest day of their lives. It matters more than you probably realize. Marcus returned to work with Beverly's words echoing in his mind. The rest of his shift included routine transports, a man with pneumonia going for chest x-rays, an elderly woman being moved from the emergency department to a regular room, a teenager with appendicitis heading to surgery. Each interaction felt different now, more intentional. At the end of his shift, Marcus stopped by the oncology floor on his way out of the hospital. He told himself he was just checking to see if there were any late transport requests, but he knew he was really hoping to see Jessica engage. How her consultation had gone. The waiting area was empty except for a maintenance worker, placing burnt-out fluorescent bulbs. Marcus was about to leave when he heard soft crying coming from one of the small consultation rooms. The door was slightly ajar and he could see Jessica inside, still in her wheelchair, holding a tissue to her eyes. Marcus knocked gently on the doorframe. Mrs. Palmer, everything okay? Jessica looked up, surprised to see him. Marcus, what are you doing here? Just finishing up my shift. Saw you were still here and wanted to make sure you didn't need a ride back to your room. Jessica wiped her eyes and managed a shaky smile. I was supposed to call someone to pick me up, but I can't seem to make myself do it. Once I make that phone call, I have to tell them what the doctor said, and then it becomes real. Marcus entered the room and sat in the chair across from Jessica. Want to talk about it? For the next 20 minutes, Jessica told Marcus about her diagnosis. The doctors had found something during routine postpartum care that had led to more tests, biopsies, and ultimately the devastating news that she was facing an aggressive form of cancer that would require immediate and intensive treatment. The worst part, Jessica said, is that my daughter won't remember me if I don't make it. She's only 3 months old. I keep thinking about all the things I wanted to teach her, all the moments we won't have. Marcus listened without offering. Platitudes or false hope. When Jessica finished, he was quiet for a moment before speaking. My grandmother used to tell me that love doesn't need memory to survive. She said that the love we give to people, especially children, becomes part of who they are, even if they don't remember the specific moments. He paused, thinking about his own children and how much he wanted to be present for them. Your daughter may not remember the details of being 3 months old, but she'll carry the feeling of being loved by you for the rest of her life. Jessica cried again, but this time it seemed different, less desperate, more like a release. Can I ask you something? Personal, she said. Sure. Do you have children? 2, Emma's 8, Tyler's 6. What's the best part about being their dad? Marcus thought about the question seriously. Watching them discover who they are. Emma's fearless she. Try anything, climb any tree, talk to any stranger. The opposite, cautious, thoughtful, but incredibly creative. Every day they show me something new about themselves, and I get to be the person who helps them become whoever they're meant to be. That's what I want, Jessica said. Even if I only get a short time, I want to help my daughter discover who she is. Marcus wheeled Jessica back to her room in the maternity wing, where her husband was waiting with their daughter. The reunion was bittersweet joy at being together mixed with the weight of the news Jessica now had to share. As Marcus walked to his car in the pre-dawn darkness, he reflected on how much his perspective had changed since that first night when he'd gotten lost in the hospital corridors. The job that had started as a desperate financial necessity had become something that felt essential to who he was. The following week brought a new challenge, when Marcus was assigned to work a double shift due to staffing shortages. 16 hours of transport meant navigating the hospital during both day and night operations, each with their own distinct rhythms and personalities. During the day shift, Marcus encountered a different side of hospital life. Families filled waiting areas, children's voices echoed through pediatric wings, and there was a general sense of controlled chaos as visitors navigated the complex building to find their loved ones. One transport request took Marcus to the pediatric intensive care unit, where he was assigned to move a 7-year-old boy named Danny Rodriguez to the surgical floor. Danny had been in a car accident and was scheduled for another operation to repair internal injuries. Danny's parents, Maria and Carlos Rodriguez, had clearly been at the hospital for days. They had the hollow-eyed look of people who had been surviving on vending machine coffee and anxious hope. When Marcus arrived to transport Danny, both parents insisted on walking alongside the gurney, holding one of their son's hands. "Is this going to hurt?" Danny asked as they made their way to the elevator. "The doctors are going to make sure you don't feel anything," Marcus assured him. "I bet you're pretty brave anyway." "I'm not scared," Danny said, though his grip on his parents' hands suggested otherwise. As they waited for the elevator, Danny looked up at Marcus with serious eyes. "Are you going to stay with me until I go to sleep?" Marcus looked at Danny's parents, who nodded gratefully. "If it's okay with your mom and dad, I'd be happy to." In the pre-surgical area, Marcus stayed with the Rodriguez family as nurses prepared Danny for surgery. He helped distract the boy with questions about school, his favorite video games, and whether he preferred soccer or baseball. When the anesthesiologist arrived to explain the procedure, Marcus stepped back but remained visible, offering silent support to a family facing their worst fears. When it was time for Danny to be wheeled into surgery, he reached out for Marcus's hand. "Thank you for being nice to me," Danny said, as Marcus walked back through the hospital corridors. He realized that moments like these had become the reason he looked forward to coming to work each night. The paycheck that had initially drawn him to the job was still important. Tima and Tyler still needed food, clothes, and a roof over their heads, but the work itself had become meaningful in ways he'd never anticipated. That evening, as Marcus prepared for the night portion of his dad's double shift, Robert Tanner pulled him aside in the transport office. "I've been getting feedback about your work," Robert said, and Marcus felt his stomach tighten with worry. "Good feedback," Robert continued, noting Marcus's expression. "Patients have been asking for you specifically. Nurses have commented on how you handled difficult situations. Administration has noticed." "What does that mean?" "It means there might be opportunities for advancement if you're interested. Patient advocate positions, training roles, maybe even management track. You've got a natural talent for this work. Marcus, the question is whether you want to build a career out of it." Marcus thought about Robert's words as he began his night shift duties. A career in healthcare had never been part of his plan, but then again, neither had losing his manufacturing job or discovering that he had a gift for comforting people during their most vulnerable moments. Around midnight, Marcus received a transport request that would test everything he'd learned about balancing professional boundaries with human compassion. The computer showed only Eleanor Walsh, room 502 to emergency department, urgent. Marcus recognized the name immediately. Eleanor was the patient from his first night. The woman who'd been going for heart surgery and had told him he had a gift for making people comfortable. Seeing her name on another transport request, especially to the emergency department, filled him with concern. Room 502 was in the cardiac recovery wing, where patients stayed after heart procedures. Marcus knocked and entered to find Eleanor sitting on the edge of her bed, dressed in street clothes but looking pale and unsteady. "Mrs. Walsh?" "It's Marcus from Patient Transport. We met a few weeks ago." Eleanor looked up at him, and her face broke into a smile, despite her obvious discomfort. "Marcus, of course I remember you. You were my first friendly face that night. How did your surgery go?" "Better than expected, actually. I was supposed to go home tomorrow, but I started having some chest pain earlier tonight." "To run more tests just to be safe?" As Marcus helped Eleanor into the wheelchair, he noticed she seemed more fragile than during their first meeting. The surgery had clearly taken a toll, and the current setback had shaken her confidence. "Are you worried?" Marcus asked, as they made their way toward the emergency department. "Terrified," Eleanor admitted. "I thought I was out of the woods. It feels like starting all over again." They rode the elevator in silence, but as they approached the emergency department, Elena reached out and touched Marcus's arm. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "Of course. That night we first met, when you took me down for my procedure, You said something that stayed with me through the entire surgery and recovery. Marcus tried to remember their conversation, but the details were hazy among the dozens of patient interactions since then. You told me I was stronger than I knew, Eleanor continued. And when things got scary in surgery, when I wasn't sure I was going to make it through, I kept hearing your voice saying that. It sounds silly, but it helped. In his throat. He'd had no idea that a casual comment meant to provide comfort had carried such weight for Eleanor. That doesn't sound silly at all, he said. Sometimes we all need someone to remind us of our own strength. As Marcus helped Eleanor get settled in the emergency department, she grabbed his hand one more time. Thank you, Marcus. Not just for tonight, but for that first night when I needed to hear exactly what you said. You have no idea how much difference you make in people's lives. Walking back through the hospital corridors after leaving Eleanor, in capable hands, Marcus reflected on the unexpected trajectory his life had taken since that first night. When he'd gotten lost looking for the custodial office, he thought about Jessica Palmer facing cancer while trying to be present for her infant daughter. About Danny Rodriguez trusting him to stay by his side before surgery. Their impact, the financial struggles that had driven him to take any available job, remained real and pressing. But somewhere along the way, this accidental career had become something more than just a paycheck. It'd become a calling he'd never known he possessed. It's built on the simple foundation of seeing people during their most vulnerable moments and offering whatever comfort he could provide. Marcus had no way of knowing that his journey through the wrong door was about to come full circle in a way that would reveal just how far-reaching the impact of genuine human connection could be. The promotion offer came on a Thursday morning when Marcus was least expecting it. He'd just finished a particularly challenging night shift that had included transporting 3 emergency cases and staying overtime to help with a multi-car accident that had overwhelmed the trauma department. Exhausted and looking forward to going home to catch a few hours of sleep before picking up his kids. Marcus was surprised to find Janet Morrison from Human Resources waiting for him in the transport office. Marcus, do you have a few minutes to talk? Janet asked, holding a manila folder that looked official and important. They walked to a small conference room, where Janet laid out an opportunity that seemed almost too good to be true. The hospital was creating a new physician-patient experience. Coordinator specifically designed to bridge the gap between medical staff and patients' emotional needs. It would mean a significant pay increase, regular daytime hours, and the chance to develop programs that could impact hundreds of patients rather than the dozen or so Marcus encountered each shift. Your name keeps coming up in patient satisfaction surveys, Janet explained, opening the folder to reveal pages of positive feedback. Patients specifically mention you by name, describing how you made them feel safe, heard, and cared for during some of the most difficult moments of their lives. Marcus read through some of the comments, recognizing names and faces from recent weeks. An elderly man thanked the transport worker named Marcus who stayed with me when I was scared about my heart surgery. A woman praised Marcus from patient transport who helped my teenage daughter feel brave before her appendectomy. Page after page of similar sentiments, all describing moments that Marcus had considered simply part of doing his job well. The position would start in 6 weeks, Janet continued. It would give you time to finish training your replacement and transition into the new role. The salary is substantial enough that you could move to day shifts and still make more than you're earning now. Marcus felt a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. The financial relief would be enormous. He could finally stop worrying about mortgage payments and start thinking about his children's futures in concrete terms rather than anxious hopes. But something about leaving the transport department felt like abandoning a part of himself he'd only recently discovered. Can I think about it? Marcus asked. Of course. Take your time, but not too much time. Administration wants to fill the position quickly. Driving home that morning, Marcus wrestled with the decision. The logical choice was obvious: better pay, better hours, better long-term prospects. But there was something about the direct patient interaction in transport work that fulfilled him in ways he struggled to articulate. At home, Emma and Tyler were getting ready for school with the chaotic energy that characterized their morning routine. Emma couldn't find her soccer cleats. Tyler was convinced he'd forgotten an important assignment, and the coffee maker had chosen that morning to break down completely. Rough night, Dad, was noticing Marcus's tired expression as he helped. Her search for the missing cleats. Actually a pretty good night. But I got some big news at work that I need to think about. Tyler looked up from his backpack, where he'd been frantically searching for the assignment that turned out to be safely tucked in his folder. Good news or bad news? Good news, I think. A promotion, more money, better schedule. Then why do you look worried? Emma asked with the perceptive directness that 8-year-olds possessed. Marcus paused, realizing his daughter had identified something he'd been struggling to name. I guess I'm worried about leaving behind work that feels important. Is the new job not important? Tyler asked. It's important in a different way. The work I do now, I help people one at a time when they're scared or hurting. The new job would be about helping lots of people, but not as directly. Emma found her soccer cleats under the couch and sat down to put them on. Remember when I broke my arm and we had to go to the hospital? Marcus nodded, remembering that anxious day vividly. The person who wheeled me around made me laugh when I was scared. If you took the new job, would you still be able to make people laugh when they're scared? Maybe not in the same way. Then maybe you should think about what's more important, making more money or making scared people laugh. As Marcus dropped his children off at school, Emma's words echoed in his mind. He'd taken the transport job out of financial desperation, but somewhere along the way, it had become about more than just earning a paycheck. That evening, Marcus arrived at work too. Find the transport office buzzing with unusual activity. Robert Tanner was coordinating with several supervisors from other departments. And there was an air of urgency that typically accompanied major hospital emergencies. What's happening? Marcus asked Beverly Chen, who was restocking a transport cart with extra supplies. Multi-vehicle accident on the interstate, Beverly explained. School bus involved. We're expecting multiple pediatric trauma cases within the hour. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Pediatric emergencies were the most challenging part of hospital work, the fear in children's eyes, the desperation of parents, the weight of knowing that young lives hung in the balance. All transport staff are being called in, Robert announced. To the room. This is going to be a long night, and we need everyone at their best. The first ambulance arrived 20 minutes later, followed by a steady stream of emergency vehicles that turned the hospital's ambulance bay into a controlled chaos of medical personnel. Flashing lights and urgent voices coordinating care. Marcus's first assignment was to transport a 10-year-old girl named Sophie Chuno, relation to Beverly, from the emergency department to pediatric surgery. Sophie had suffered internal injuries in the accident and was conscious but disoriented, calling out for her mother, who was being treated in a separate part of the hospital. Where's my mom? Sophie asked, as Marcus carefully positioned her gurney for transport. She's here in the hospital too, getting the best care possible, Marcus replied. Right now, we're going to take you to see some doctors who are really good at helping kids feel better. Sophie's hand found Marcus's as they moved through the corridors. Are you going to stay with me? As long as the doctors will let me, I'll be right there. In the pre-surgical area, Marcus stayed with Sophie while nurses prepared her for emergency surgery. He told her stories about his own children, described the competence and kindness of the medical team, and provided a steady, calm presence while chaos swirled around them. Will you tell my mom I was brave? Sophie asked, as the anesthesiologist approached. I'll tell her you were the bravest person I've ever met, Marcus promised. As Sophie was wheeled into surgery, Marcus realized that no amount of money could replace the feeling of being exactly where he was needed most. The patient experience coordinator position would be meaningful work, but it would mean administrative, Meetings instead of moments like these, where his presence could provide comfort during a child's most frightening experience. The night continued with a series of transports that tested every skill Marcus had developed over the past month. He moved a teenage boy with multiple fractures to orthopedic surgery, transported a 7-year-old girl to the ICU after emergency neurosurgery, and helped coordinate family reunifications as parents were cleared to see their injured children. Around 3 in the morning, during a brief lull in emergency cases, Marcus found himself in the family waiting area where parents of the accident victims had gathered. The scene was heartbreaking, mothers and fathers holding each other, grandparents comforting younger siblings, everyone waiting for news about children who had been laughing and talking on a school bus. Just hours earlier, Marcus noticed a woman, sitting alone in a corner chair, staring at her hands folded in her lap. Something about her posture, the way she held herself separate from the other families, caught his attention. "Excuse me," Marcus said, approaching carefully. "I'm Marcus, from the hospital staff. Is there anything I can do to help you?" The woman looked up, and Marcus saw a face marked by exhaustion and worry. She appeared to be in her 50s, with graying hair and clothes that suggested she'd been called away from work or home without time to prepare. "I'm Helen Patterson," she said. "I'm a teacher at the school. I was supposed to be on that bus." Marcus sat down in the chair next to Helen, understanding immediately why she sat apart from the families. She carried a different kind of burden survivors. Guilt mixed with the weight of caring for students who had been in her charge. "I called in sick this morning," Helen continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I had a migraine and couldn't face the field trip. If I'd been there, maybe I could have done something. Maybe I could have helped when the accident happened." "How many students were on the trip?" Marcus asked. 32. All 4th graders. They were so excited about visiting the Science Museum. Helen's voice broke slightly. "I've been teaching for 23 years, and these kids are like my own children." Marcus listened as Helen described each injured student, their personalities, their families, their dreams for the future. She knew details that spoke to genuine care, which students struggled with math but excelled at art, whose parents were divorced, who had been nervous about the field trip but had been reassured by friends. "The thing is," Helen said, "I almost didn't become a teacher. 25 years ago, I was in a really dark place. Lost my job, going through a divorce, felt like my whole life was falling apart. I was thinking about ending everything." Marcus felt the weight of Helen's words, understanding that she was sharing something deeply personal. "I was sitting in my car in a hospital parking lot, not this hospital, but one across town, trying to work up the courage to go through with what I was planning. This young man, maybe 19 or 20, was walking through the parking lot in scrubs. He looked over and saw me crying, and instead of just walking by, he came over and knocked on my window." Helen paused, lost in the memory. "He didn't know what I was thinking about doing, but he said something that changed everything. He said I had a beautiful smile, and that he hoped whatever was making me sad would get better, because the world needed people who could smile like that." Marcus felt something stir in his memory, but Helen continued before he could fully process it. "It sounds simple, but at that moment, it was exactly what I needed to hear. That stranger's kindness made me realize that maybe my life wasn't over. Maybe there were still good things ahead. I drove home that night, got help for my depression, and eventually found my way to teaching." Helen looked directly at Marcus. "Every day for the past 25 years when I've been with my students, I've thought about that young man and how his small act of kindness saved my life. I became a teacher because I wanted to make the same kind of difference for kids that he made for me." Marcus felt his heart racing as pieces of a memory began falling into place. 25 years ago, he would have been 19. He had worked briefly at a hospital across town in the kitchen, delivering meals to patients. He remembered walking through parking lots after late shifts, and remembered seeing someone crying in a car one night. "What did he look like?" Marcus asked, his voice barely steady. "Young, dark hair, kind eyes. He had this gentle way of speaking, like he really cared about people." Helen studied Marcus's face. "Actually, you remind me of him a little bit. Same kind of presence." Marcus's mind raced back 25 years to a night when he'd been young and uncertain about his own future. working a temporary job while trying to figure out what to do with his life. Remembered seeing a woman crying in a car. Remembered feeling compelled to check on her. Remembered saying something about her smile. "Helen," Marcus said slowly, "what kind of car were you driving that night?" Helen looked surprised by the specific question. "A blue Honda Civic." "Why?" Marcus felt the world shift around him. He remembered that car, remembered the woman's face. Illuminated by the interior light, remembered the way she'd looked at him when he'd spoken to her. "I think," Marcus said, his voice filled with wonder, "I think I was that young man." Helen stared at him, and slowly recognition dawned in her eyes. "Oh my God, it's you. It's really you." They sat in stunned silence for a moment, both processing the impossible coincidence that had brought them together again in another hospital during another crisis, 25 years later. "You saved my life that night," Helen whispered, tears streaming down her face. "And because you saved my life, I've been able to teach hundreds of children, including the 32 kids who were on that bus today." Marcus felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Helen was telling him. A moment of kindness he'd barely remembered had rippled forward through 25 years, touching hundreds of lives through Helen's work as a teacher. "That smile," Helen continued, "that smile I remember from 25 years ago, it saved my life once. And now here you are again, in another hospital, still helping people with that same smile." As they talked through the early morning hours, Marcus learned about Helen's career, her students, and the countless ways that one moment of human connection had multiplied into decades of positive impact. She showed him pictures of graduation, ceremonies where former students had returned to thank her, letters from kids who credited her with believing in them when no one else did, and awards recognizing her dedication to education. "I never forgot that night," Helen said, "and I never stopped looking for ways to pass on the kindness that strangers showed me. Every time I helped a struggling student, every time I stayed late to tutor someone, every time I told a kid they were capable of more than they believed, I was honoring what you did for me." As the sun began to rise in the last of the accident, victims had been stabilized. Marcus realized that his decision about the promotion had become clear. The patient experience coordinator position would be important work, but his real calling was in these direct moments of human connection. These opportunities to offer comfort and hope to people during their darkest hours, just as his smile had. Saved Helen's life 25 years ago, and her life had gone on to touch hundreds of others. Marcus understood that his work in patient transport was about more than just moving people from one department to another. It was about being present for moments when kindness could change the trajectory of someone's entire life. The revelation that he and Helen had met before, that his forgotten act of compassion had led to her career as a teacher and indirectly to her influence on hundreds of children, gave Marcus a new understanding of how individual moments of care could ripple forward in ways impossible to predict or measure. As he prepared to go home that morning, Marcus knew he would decline the promotion and continue working in patient transport, where he could be exactly where he was meant to, be offering his smile and presence to people who needed to know they weren't alone in their darkest moments. The weeks following Marcus's reunion with Helen Patterson transformed his understanding of purpose in ways that extended far beyond his work at Riverside Medical Center. The revelation that his forgotten moment of kindness had saved a life and subsequently touched hundreds of others through Helen's teaching career created a new lens through which he viewed every interaction. Every smile, every word of comfort he offered to patients and their families, word of Marcus's decision to decline. The promotion spread quietly through the hospital. Some colleagues questioned his choice to turn down better pay and regular hours. But those who worked closely with him understood that he'd found something more valuable than career advancements. He discovered his calling. Janet Morrison from Human Resources requested a follow-up meeting to discuss his decision. Clearly puzzled by someone turning down what appeared to be an obvious step forward, "I want to make sure you fully understand what you're declining," Janet said, spreading out benefit packages and salary comparisons across the conference room table. "This position would set you up for long-term success in healthcare administration. You'd have influence over policy decisions that could affect thousands of patients." Marcus studied the documents, appreciating the security they represented but feeling certain about his choice. I understand the opportunity, and I'm grateful it was offered. But I've learned something about myself recently. I'm most effective when I'm working directly with people during their most vulnerable moments. The new position would take me away from that. Can you help me understand what changed your mind? Janet asked. Your initial reaction seemed positive. Marcus told Janet about the school bus accident, about Helen Patterson, and about discovering the long-term impact of seemingly small acts of kindness. As he spoke, Janet's expression shifted from confusion to understanding. You're talking about something that can't be measured in traditional metrics, Janet observed. Patient satisfaction scores, efficiency ratings, cost-benefit analyses. None of those capture what you're describing. Exactly. But that doesn't make it less important. Janet gathered the papers and closed the folder. You know, Marcus, in 15 years of healthcare administration, I've seen countless people chase promotions and salary increases while losing sight of why they entered healthcare in the first place. Maybe we need more people like you who remember that healing isn't just about medical procedures. It's about human connection. The conversation with Janet reinforced Marcus's conviction that he was making the right choice, but it also sparked an idea. If individual moments of kindness could have such far-reaching effects, what would happen if those moments became more intentional and systematic? Marcus began documenting his patient interactions, not for administrative purposes, but to better understand the patterns of what worked best in different situations. He noticed that children responded well to storytelling and humor, that elderly patients appreciated being asked about their families and histories, and that people facing serious diagnoses needed space for their fears alongside gentle reassurance. These observations led to conversations with Beverly Chen and other experienced nurses about the psychological aspects of patient care. Beverly introduced Marcus to Dr. Elizabeth Vance, psychiatrist who specialized in medical trauma and had been advocating for more comprehensive emotional support systems within the hospital. What you're describing aligns perfectly with research on the healing environment, Dr. Vance explained during their first meeting. Studies consistently show that patients recover faster and with fewer complications when they feel emotionally supported throughout their treatment. Dr. Vance had been working on a proposal for a patient companion program, a system where trained volunteers would provide emotional support and advocacy for patients who didn't have family members available or who needed additional comfort during particularly frightening procedures. The challenge has been finding people with the right temperament and natural ability, Dr. Vance continued. Most volunteers are well-meaning, but they lack the intuitive understanding of when to speak and when to listen, when to offer hope, and when to simply be present. Marcus saw an opportunity to expand his impact without leaving the direct patient care that fulfilled him, working with Dr. Vance. He developed a training program based on his experiences in patient transport, focusing on the practical skills of reading emotional cues, offering appropriate comfort, and maintaining professional boundaries while providing genuine human connection. The first group of patient companion volunteers included retired teachers, social workers looking for meaningful part-time work, and college students considering careers in healthcare. Marcus found that teaching others about patient interaction deepened his own understanding of the work. The most important thing to remember, Marcus told the first training group, is that you can't fix what people are going through. You can't take away their pain or fear or uncertainty, but you can make sure they don't face it alone. One of the volunteers, a retired elementary school principal named Catherine Webb, asked about handling situations where patients died despite everyone's best efforts. I lost a patient last month, Marcus shared, an elderly man who'd been coming to the hospital for months for cancer treatment. I'd transported him dozens of times, and we'd developed a real friendship. When he died, I felt like I'd failed him somehow. Marcus paused, remembering the weight of that loss. But then his daughter found me at the hospital and told me that her father had talked about me constantly, how I always asked about his garden. I remembered his stories about serving in the Navy, how I made him feel like a person instead of just a patient. She said those moments of connection had made his final months more bearable. The training program became so successful that other hospitals in the Cleveland area began requesting similar programs. Marcus found himself traveling to medical centers throughout Ohio, teaching healthcare workers and volunteers about the profound impact of intentional kindness in medical settings. Meanwhile, his own work in patient transport continued to provide daily reminders of why this calling mattered. Each shift brought new opportunities to practice what he'd learned about the healing power of human connection. One evening, Marcus received a transport request that would test everything he'd developed about maintaining hope in the face of devastating circumstances. The computer showed Anna Kowalski, age 16, room 612 to pediatric palliative care. Room 612 was in the oncology wing, where Marcus had transported many patients over the past months. But pediatric palliative care was different. It meant a young person was facing in-death life decisions. Families were grappling with the unthinkable. Anna Kowalski was awake when Marcus arrived. Though clearly weakened by months of treatment, her parents, Thomas and Marie Kowalski, sat on either side of her bed, holding her hands and speaking in the gentle tones people used when trying to maintain normalcy in impossible circumstances. "Anna, this is Marcus," Marie said. "He's going to take you to meet with Dr. Harrison." Anna looked at Marcus with eyes that seemed far older than her 16 years. "You're new," she observed. "I know all the regular transport people." "I've been here about 2 months," Marcus replied. "But I don't think our paths have crossed before." "I've been here on and off for 8 months," Anna said matter-of-factly. "You get to know the staff when you're a frequent customer." Marcus prepared the wheelchair. He was struck by Anna's calm acceptance of her situation. There was no anger or self-pity in her demeanor, just a quiet maturity that spoke to having faced realities no teenager should encounter. "Are you nervous about meeting with Dr. Harrison?" Marcus asked, as they began moving through the corridor. "Not nervous exactly," Anna replied. "More like, ready to hear what our options are. My parents are having a harder time with it than I am." They rode the elevator in comfortable silence, but as they approached the palliative care office, Anna spoke again. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Sure. Do you have kids?" "2, a daughter who's 8 and a son who's 6. Anna nodded thoughtfully. "What do you hope for? Like, what are the most important things you want them to experience in life?" Marcus considered the question seriously, understanding that Anna was processing her own truncated future through the lens of his children's unlimited possibilities. "I want them to feel loved unconditionally," Marcus said. "I want them to find work that feels meaningful, to have friendships that sustain them, to experience beauty in ordinary moments. I want them to know that their lives matter, that they make a difference in the world." "Those are good hopes," Anna said. "I think I've experienced most of those things, even in 16 years. The love part especially. My parents have been incredible through all of this." As they reached the palliative care office, Anna reached out and touched Marcus's arm. "Thank you for talking to me like a normal person instead of a tragedy," she said. "A lot of people don't know how to act around me anymore." "You are a normal person," Marcus replied. "You're just dealing with extraordinary circumstances." After settling Anna with Dr. Harrison and her parents, Marcus walked back through the hospital corridors thinking about her question regarding what he hoped for his own children. The conversation had highlighted something he'd been struggling to articulate. About his work, it wasn't just about providing comfort to people who were suffering, but about affirming their fundamental humanity and dignity regardless of their circumstances. Later that week, Marcus received unexpected news that Helen Patterson wanted to visit the hospital to meet with him again. She arrived on a Saturday afternoon carrying a large photo album and an expression of excitement mixed with nervous energy. "I hope you don't mind me coming by," Helen said as they sat in the hospital cafeteria. "But I wanted to show you something that I think will mean a lot to you." Helen opened the photo album to reveal page after page of photographs from her 25 years of teaching. Graduation ceremonies, classroom celebrations, science fair projects, holiday concerts, hundreds of images capturing moments of childhood, joy, and achievement. "These are some of my students over the years," Helen explained, turning pages slowly. "But more than that, these are the lives that were touched because you saved my life that night 25 years ago." She pointed to individual photos and told Marcus's stories about each child. Maria Santos, who'd struggled with severe dyslexia, but had become a pediatric nurse after Helen spent extra hours helping her with reading. James Thompson, who'd been headed toward dropping out of school until Helen convinced him he was capable of more than he believed, he was now an engineer. Sarah Chen, who'd been painfully shy, but had bloomed into confidence under Helen's encouragement. She'd become a teacher herself, inspired by Helen's example. "Every single one of these children benefited from your kindness," Helen said. "Because you cared enough to check on a stranger in a parking lot. I lived to teach them." And many of them went on to help others: teachers, nurses, social workers, parents who raise kind children of their own. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the visual representation of his forgotten acts' ripple effects. Each photo represented not just Helen's impact on a child, but the continuation of a chain of kindness that had started with one moment of genuine concern for another person's well-being. "There's something else," Helen said, turning to the back of the album. "I kept this from that night." She showed Marcus a hospital business card, not from Riverside Medical Center, but from the hospital where he'd worked briefly in the kitchen. 25 years earlier, the card was worn and faded, but Helen had written on the back, in careful handwriting, "The young man who saved my life, remember to pass it forward." "I've carried this card in my wallet for 25 years, Helen said. "It's been my reminder that small acts of kindness can have immeasurable impact. And every time I've helped a struggling student, or stayed late to tutor someone, or simply listened when a child needed to be heard, I've thought about you and that night." Marcus stared at the card, recognizing his own youthful handwriting on the employee identification. The physical evidence of their connection made the entire experience feel even more profound. "Helen," Marcus said, "I need to tell you something. Meeting you again, learning about all of this, it's changed how I understand my purpose here. I've started training other hospital staff and volunteers about the importance of human connection and healing. Your story has become central to that." "Training?" Helen's eyes filled with tears. "So the ripples are still spreading in ways neither of us could have imagined." As their visit concluded, Helen made a request that would create the next chapter in Marcus's evolving role at the hospital. "Would you consider speaking to my current students? I think they need to hear about the power of kindness from someone who's lived it. And I think it would help them understand that every interaction they have with another person matters." The following month, Marcus found himself standing in front of 32 fourth-grade students, the same class that had been involved in the bus accident weeks earlier. Most of the children had recovered fully, though a few still showed signs of their ordeal in bandages or careful movements, as Marcus told the students about the importance of kindness and how one moment of caring could change someone's entire life. He saw in their faces the same potential that Helen had nurtured for 25 years. These children would grow up to become teachers, doctors, parents, and community leaders, carrying forward the lessons they learned about the power of human connection. "The most important thing to remember," Marcus told the class, "is that you never know when your kindness might be exactly what someone needs to hear. A smile, a kind word, just letting someone know you care. These things might seem small, but they can change everything." After his presentation, one student raised her hand. "Mr. Marcus, how do you know when someone needs kindness?" Thinking about all the patients he'd transported, all the families he'd comforted, all the moments when he'd sensed that someone needed exactly what he had to offer. "You pay attention," he said. "You look at people, really look at them, and you listen not just to what they're saying, but to what they might need to hear. And when you see someone who's hurting, or scared, or alone, you don't walk by. You stop and you offer whatever comfort you can." As Marcus drove home that afternoon, he reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with taking the wrong shift at the hospital. What had started as financial desperation had become a calling that extended far beyond his original job description. Through training other healthcare workers, speaking to students, and continuing his daily work with patients, Marcus had found ways to multiply the impact of individual moments of kindness. The promotion he'd turned down would have given him more money and prestige, but it wouldn't have given him the opportunity to touch lives directly, to be present for people during their most vulnerable moments, and to perpetuate the kind of human connection that could ripple forward through generations. Marcus thought about Emma and Tyler, about the lessons he was learning to pass on to them, about the importance of seeing and caring for other people. He thought about Anna Kowalski and her wise questions about what made life meaningful. He thought about Helen Patterson and the 25 years of teaching that had grown from one moment of noticing someone in pain. Most of all, thought about tomorrow night's shift and the patients he would meet, the families he would comfort, and the opportunities he would have to offer his smile to people who needed to know they weren't alone. Each transport request represented another chance to practice the kind of intentional kindness that could change someone's trajectory in ways it's impossible to predict or measure. Marcus had learned that taking the wrong shift could lead to finding exactly where you belonged, and that sometimes the most profound purpose came not from grand gestures or career achievements, but from the simple, repeated act of being present for other people during their moments of greatest need. The struggling father, who had walked through the wrong door 2 months earlier, had become someone who understood that every smile, every kind word, every moment of genuine connection was an investment in a better world. One patient, one family, one human interaction at a time. 6 months after declining the promotion, Marcus found himself standing before the hospital's board of directors, presenting data that would have seemed impossible when he first walked through the wrong door. Patient satisfaction scores in departments where his companion program operated had increased by 37%. Readmission rates had dropped by 12%. Most remarkably, staff turnover in participating units had decreased by nearly half. These numbers represent more than statistical improvements. Marcus explained to the assembled executives, medical directors, and board members. They represent a fundamental shift in how we approach healing, recognizing that emotional support isn't separate from medical treatment, but essential to it. Dr. Margaret Foster, the hospital's chief medical officer, leaned forward in her chair. Marcus, can you walk us through a specific example of how this program works in practice? Marcus clicked to the next slide in his presentation, which showed a photo of the pediatric wing decorated with colorful murals and comfortable seating, areas where families could gather. Last month, we had a 7-year-old patient named Lucas, who was scheduled for a complex heart surgery. His parents were divorced, both working multiple jobs, and couldn't be with him consistently during his 2-week hospital stay. Under our old system, Lucas would have faced much of this experience alone, with only brief interactions with busy medical staff. Marcus advanced to the next slide, showing before and after photos of Lucas, the first showing a frightened child clinging to a nurse, the second showing him laughing while playing a board game. Through the companion program, Lucas was paired with David Chen, a retired engineer who volunteers 20 hours a week. David spent time with Lucas before surgery, explaining what would happen in age-appropriate terms. He was there when Lucas woke up from anesthesia, providing familiar comfort during disorientation. Over the 2 weeks, David helped Lucas with schoolwork, played games, and most importantly, provided consistent emotional support. Board member Patricia Williams, a former hospital administrator herself, asked what was the measurable outcome. Lucas's recovery time was 40% faster than projected. He required fewer pain medications, had no anxiety-related complications, and his parents reported feeling significantly more confident about his care. But beyond those metrics, Lucas told his mother that David made him feel brave when he was scared. Marcus clicked to a video testimonial from Lucas's mother, Rachel Wright. Her voice filled the boardroom as she described the difference the program had made, not just for Lucas, but for their entire family. I was working 2 jobs, and couldn't be there as much as I wanted, Rachel's recorded voice explained. David wasn't trying to replace me as Lucas's mom. He made sure my son knew he was cared for every minute I couldn't be there. When I think about how alone and scared Lucas would have been without that support. The video ended and Marcus faced a room of executives who clearly understood they were seeing something that transcended typical hospital metrics. The program currently operates with 43 trained volunteers across 8 departments, Marcus continued. We're requesting approval to expand to all patient care areas and to establish a formal department of patient experience with dedicated funding. What Marcus didn't mention in his presentation was the personal transformation the past 6 months had brought to his own life. The financial stability from his hospital income had allowed him to move Emma and Tyler to a better school district. But more importantly, His work had given him a sense of purpose that radiated into every aspect of his parenting. Emma had started a kindness club at her new school, inspired by her father's stories about making people feel less alone when they were scared. Tyler had begun volunteering with Marcus on weekend hospital visits, reading books to pediatric patients who were too young for the formal companion program. "Dad," Emma had said the previous week while they were making dinner together, I want to be a doctor when I grow up, but the kind who helps people feel better in their hearts, not just their bodies." "That's called a psychiatrist," Marcus had explained, "and I think you'd be excellent at it. Will you teach me about making people feel safe like you do?" These conversations with his children reminded Marcus daily that the ripple effects of his work extended far beyond the hospital walls. He was raising children who understood that their purpose in life was connected to how they treated other people, especially those who were vulnerable or afraid. The board approved Marcus's expansion proposal unanimously. But with it came an unexpected request. Dr. Foster asked Marcus to consider a newly created position, a director of patient experience that would allow him to maintain direct patient contact while overseeing the growing program. "It's not like the administrative role you turned down before," Dr. Foster explained during their private meeting after the board presentation. "This position would be 60% patient interaction, 40% program development. Still be transporting patients, training companions, and providing direct care. But you'd also be shaping policy and expanding the program to other hospitals in our network." Marcus found himself in familiar territory, weighing the benefits of career advancement against his commitment to hands-on patient care. But this opportunity felt different because it had grown organically from his work rather than being imposed. "From outside, can I think about it?" Marcus asked. "Take all the time you need. But Marcus, I want you to know that what you've built here is revolutionary. Healthcare systems across the country are struggling with patient satisfaction and staff burnout. You've found a solution that addresses both problems while actually improving medical outcomes." That evening, Marcus discussed the opportunity with Emma and Tyler over dinner. At 9 and 7 years old, they had become his most trusted advisors. "For major decisions, would you still get to help scared people?" Tyler asked. "Yes, but I'd also be teaching other hospitals how to help scared people too." Emma considered this thoughtfully. "So instead of helping maybe 10 people a day, you could help teach people who would help hundreds of people a day." "That's exactly right. Then you should do it," Emma said with the certainty that children brought to complex decisions. More scared people would get help. Marcus realized his daughter had captured something essential about the opportunity. It represented a chance to multiply his impact exponentially while maintaining the direct patient contact that gave his work meaning. The transition to director of patient experience happened gradually over 3 months. Marcus maintained his transport shifts 3 nights a week while spending 2 days developing training materials, visiting other hospitals, and working with medical schools to incorporate patient experience principles into healthcare education. His first major project was establishing companion programs at 2 other hospitals in the Cleveland system. This required training new volunteers, educating medical staff about the program's benefits, and adapting the protocols to different hospital cultures and patient populations. At University Hospitals of Cleveland, Marcus encountered initial resistance from some medical staff who viewed the companion program as unnecessary interference with established procedures. "We've been providing excellent medical care for 70 years without volunteers holding patients' hands," Dr. Richard Brennan, the chief of surgery, said during Marcus's orientation presentation. "You're absolutely right about the excellent medical care," Marcus replied. "The companion program doesn't change any medical procedures. It simply ensures that patients receive emotional support alongside their medical treatment, which research shows improves both satisfaction and outcomes." Dr. Brennan's skepticism was shared by several other physicians who worried about untrained volunteers interfering with medical protocols or creating liability issues. Marcus addressed these concerns by inviting skeptical staff members to observe companion interactions and by sharing data from Riverside Medical Center showing improved rather than compromised medical outcomes. The breakthrough came when Dr. Brennan's own father was hospitalized for emergency surgery and was paired with one of Marcus's trained companions. The elderly man, frightened and confused after a stroke, had been agitated and uncooperative with nursing staff. The companion, a retired social worker named Patricia Morales, spent hours with him, reading aloud from his favorite newspapers and helping him feel oriented and calm. My father's recovery was dramatically different because of Patricia's presence, Dr. Brennan admitted to Marcus weeks later. I watched him go from anxious and combative to cooperative and peaceful. As a surgeon, I have to acknowledge that this kind of emotional support affects medical outcomes in ways I hadn't fully appreciated. Dr. Brennan became one of the program's strongest advocates, helping Marcus overcome resistance from other physicians by sharing his personal experience and encouraging colleagues to observe companion interactions firsthand. Meanwhile, Marcus's work attracted attention from healthcare systems beyond Cleveland. He received invitations to speak at medical conferences in Chicago, Detroit, and Pittsburgh, sharing the research and methodologies behind successful patient experience programs at the American Hospital Association Conference in Chicago.
Marcus
Presented to an audience of nearly 800 healthcare administrators, physicians, and policymakers. His presentation, titled The Healing Power of Human Connection, Quantifying the Impact of Intentional Compassion, drew standing ovations and requests for consultation from dozens of hospitals. We often think of empathy and kindness as soft skills that are nice to have, but not essential to medical care, Marcus told the conference audience. But data consistently shows that emotional support directly impacts healing times, pain management, treatment compliance, and overall patient outcomes. This isn't just about being nice, it's about being effective. After his presentation, Marcus was approached by Dr. Amanda Rivera, Director of Patient Experience at Johns Hopkins Hospital, who wanted to implement a similar program in Baltimore. What you've created aligns with everything we know about trauma-informed care and patient-centered healing, Dr. Rivera explained. But most hospitals struggle with implementation because they try to add emotional support as an afterthought rather than integrating it into the care model from the beginning. These conversations led to Marcus's involvement in developing national standards for patient experience programs through the American Organization for Nursing Leadership. His protocols and training materials became templates that hospitals across the country could adapt to their specific populations and resources. Yet despite the expanding scope of his influence, Marcus maintained his commitment to direct patient care. Every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday night, he returned to his transport duties at Riverside Medical Center, ensuring that his understanding of patient needs remained grounded in daily experience rather than abstract theory. One Thursday night, in late autumn, Marcus received a transport request that would remind him why he'd chosen to keep one foot in direct patient care, despite his growing administrative responsibilities. The computer showed, Helen Patterson, room 324 to emergency department, urgent. Marcus felt his heart race as he read the familiar name. Helen, the teacher whose life he'd saved 25 years earlier, was back in the hospital as a patient. Rather than a visitor, room 324 was in the cardiac wing. Marcus found Helen looking smaller and more fragile than he remembered. She was conscious but clearly experiencing distress, with monitors beeping urgently around her bed. "Helen, it's Marcus," he said gently as he approached her bedside. Helen's eyes focused on him with recognition and relief. "Oh, Marcus, I was hoping it would be you. What's happening?" "Heart attack this afternoon. They're taking me down for emergency surgery." Helen's voice was steady, despite her circumstances. "I'm scared, but I'm also grateful. Grateful that if this is how my story ends, it ends with seeing you again, the person who made all the years in between possible." As Marcus prepared Helen for transport, he was struck by the circular nature of their relationship. 25 years earlier, he'd prevented her from ending her life in a hospital parking lot. Tonight, he was helping her fight to extend that same life in a hospital operating room. "Helen, you're going to be fine," Marcus said as they moved toward the elevator. "You've got the best cardiac team in Cleveland, and you're stronger than—" "You know?" Helen smiled weakly. "Those words sound familiar." In the pre-surgical area, Helen's daughter Carol was waiting with red-rimmed eyes and hands that shook as she filled out paperwork. Marcus introduced himself and explained his connection to Helen, watching Carol's expression shift from confusion to wonder. "You're the young man from the parking lot," Carol said. "Mom told me that story 100 times. She always said an angel, disguised as a hospital worker, saved her life that night." "Your mother saved herself," Marcus replied. "I just reminded her of her own strength." As Helen was wheeled into surgery, she reached out and squeezed Marcus's hand. "Thank you for showing me 25 years ago that my life mattered. Thank you for building a career around showing other people the same thing." Helen's surgery was successful, and her recovery became another data point in Marcus's research about the impact of emotional support on medical outcomes. But more than that, it reinforced his understanding that his work was part of a larger web of human connection that extended across decades and touched lives in ways impossible to fully trace or measure. 3 weeks later, Helen returned to her classroom, where she continued teaching fourth graders about kindness, empathy, and the power of small actions to create large changes in the world. Her students, many of whom had heard Marcus speak about patient care, now had a living example of how their teacher's life had been shaped by a moment of compassion from a stranger. As Marcus's first year as Director of Patient Experience concluded, he reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with taking the wrong shift. The scared, desperate father who had walked through the wrong door 18 months earlier had become someone whose work was changing healthcare policy at a national level while maintaining the daily practice of offering comfort to individual patients and families. The ripple effects continued to expand in ways Marcus could never have anticipated. Emma had started a peer counseling program at her school, inspired by her father's work with hospital patients. Tyler had convinced his teacher to invite hospital volunteers to read to his class, creating connections between his school and the companion program. Helen Patterson's students were writing letters to pediatric patients, offering encouragement to children facing medical challenges. Most importantly, Marcus had learned that purpose wasn't something to be found in grand career moves or dramatic life changes, but something to be cultivated through daily choices about how to treat other people, especially those who were vulnerable, afraid, or alone. His work had taught him that every interaction mattered, every smile counted, and every moment of genuine human connection had the potential to change someone's entire trajectory as he prepared for another shift in patient transport. Marcus understood that taking the wrong turn had led him exactly where he belonged, at the intersection of medical care and human compassion, where healing happened one person, one moment, one act of kindness at a time. 2 years into his role as Director of Patient Experience, Marcus faced his most challenging case yet, one that would test everything he'd learned about the delicate balance between hope and honesty in patient care. The request came through his personal phone rather than the hospital's transport system, and the voice on the other end belonged to Dr. Elizabeth Vance, the psychiatrist who had helped him develop the companion program. "Marcus, I need your help with something unusual," Dr. Vance said. "We have a situation that's beyond normal protocol, and I think you're the only person who can handle it." The case involved a 30-year-old architect named David Liu, who had been brought to the hospital after a suicide attempt. David had survived, but was now facing extensive reconstructive surgery and a long rehabilitation process. What made the situation extraordinary was that David had specifically requested to speak with the transport worker who helps people find hope. "He won't tell us how he knows about you," Dr. Vance explained as they walked toward the psychiatric unit. "He was barely conscious when the paramedics brought him in." But one of the first coherent things he said was asking for Marcus from patient transport. "He insists he won't work with our mental health team until he talks to you first." Marcus felt the weight of responsibility as they approached David's room. Suicide interventions required specialized training that went far beyond his expertise in patient comfort. But something about the specific request suggested a connection he didn't yet understand. David Liu was awake but staring at the ceiling when Marcus knocked and entered. His face was heavily bandaged, and multiple monitors tracked his vital signs. When David turned his head toward Marcus, there was a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "You probably don't remember me," David said, his voice hoarse from the medical interventions. "But about 8 months ago, You transported my father from the emergency department to the cardiac unit. His name was William Liu. His memory, recalling an elderly Chinese man who had suffered a massive heart attack during a family dinner. The transport had been routine, but the family's anguish had been palpable. I remember your father, Marcus said carefully. He was very sick. He died 3 hours after you brought him upstairs, David continued. But before he died, he was conscious for about 30 minutes. And during those 30 minutes, he told me about the young man who had transported him, how you had talked to him about his garden, asked about his grandchildren, made him feel calm when he was scared. David paused, struggling with both physical pain and emotional memories. My father said you told him that his family would be okay, that love doesn't end just because someone dies. He said you made him feel peaceful about leaving us, Marcus remembered. The conversation now. William Liu had been terrified about dying and leaving his family without his financial support and guidance. Marcus had spent the brief transport trying to reassure him that the love he'd given his family would sustain them, even in his absence. Dad died believing that we would be strong enough to carry on without him because of what you said, David continued. And for 8 months I tried to be strong. I took care of my mother, helped my sister with her kids, kept Dad's business running. I thought I was handling everything. David's voice broke as he continued. But last week, on the anniversary of Dad's death, everything fell apart. The business is failing, Mom is getting dementia, my sister's husband left. I realized I'm not strong enough to carry everyone. I felt like I was letting Dad down, failing at the promise you helped him believe in. Marcus understood now why David had asked for him specifically. In David's mind, Marcus represented both hope and responsibility, the person who had given his father peace but who had also inadvertently set expectations that David felt unable to meet. David, Marcus said gently, your father didn't die believing you had to be strong enough to solve everyone's problems. He died believing that the love he gave you would help you face whatever came next, including the times when you felt overwhelmed. But I tried to kill myself, David said. That's not being strong. Asking for help when you're overwhelmed isn't weakness. It's wisdom. Surviving your darkest moment and asking to talk to someone about finding hope, that's not giving up. That's fighting. Over the next hour, Marcus listened as David described the mounting pressures that had led to his suicide attempt. The conversation wasn't therapy. Marcus was careful to stay within his role as a patient advocate rather than attempting mental health treatment. But he was able to help David understand that seeking professional help wasn't a betrayal of his father's final wishes. Your father wanted you to know that his love would sustain you, Marcus explained. That includes sustaining you through getting the help you need to heal from depression and trauma. He didn't expect you to carry the world alone. David agreed to work with Dr. Vance and the hospital's mental health team, beginning a treatment process that would take months. But the foundation for his recovery was built on understanding that asking for help was consistent with, rather than contrary to, his father's hopes for his family's future. The case with David Liu highlighted something Marcus had been observing. Throughout his expanding work, the long-term impact of patient interactions extended far beyond the immediate medical episode. Family members carried forward conversations, emotions, and interpretations of hospital experiences that could influence their lives for years or even decades. This realization led Marcus to propose a follow-up program where former patients and their families could reconnect with hospital staff who had provided meaningful support during their treatment. The program, called Bridges to Healing, would offer ongoing emotional support for people dealing with the long-term psychological effects of serious illness or medical trauma. We spend enormous resources on acute medical care, Marcus explained to the hospital's executive team during his proposal presentation, but we provide minimal support for the emotional aftermath that can last for years. Someone who survives cancer may be physically cured, but still struggle with anxiety about recurrence. A family that loses a loved one despite excellent medical care may need help processing grief and trauma. The Bridges to Healing program launched 6 months later with a team of social workers, chaplains, and trained volunteers who provided ongoing support for former patients and their families. The program included support groups, individual counseling referrals, and check-in calls during significant anniversaries or milestones. Marcus continued his dual role of program development and direct patient care. But his transport shifts had evolved to include more complex cases where his experience with emotional support was specifically needed. He became the person called in when families were dealing with end-of-life decisions, when children were facing traumatic procedures, or when patients were struggling with psychiatric emergencies. One autumn evening, Marcus received a call that would bring his journey full circle in an unexpected way. Jessica Palmer, the young mother he had transported to oncology consultations during his early weeks in patient transport, wanted to meet with him. She had completed her cancer treatment successfully and was now volunteering with the companion program. But she had a specific request. "I want to tell you about my daughter," Jessica said, as they sat in the hospital cafeteria where Marcus had spent countless breaks over the past 3 years. "Sophia is almost 2 now, and she's this incredible little person, fearless, curious, always laughing. When I look at her, I see all the possibilities that almost didn't exist." Jessica pulled out her phone and showed Marcus's videos of Sophia taking her first steps, playing in a playground, celebrating her first birthday with cake smeared across her face. "During my treatment, when I was terrified that I might not live to see her grow up, you told me that the love I gave her would become part of who she was, even if she didn't remember the specific moments," Jessica continued. "I held on to that idea through months of chemotherapy and surgery." Jessica paused, gathering her thoughts. "But what I learned is that it works both ways. Knowing that Sophia was carrying my love gave me strength to fight harder than I thought possible. Every treatment, every difficult day, I reminded myself that I was fighting not just for my own life, but for all the love I still had to give her." "How is your health now?" Marcus asked. 2 years cancer-free. "My oncologist is cautiously optimistic about long-term survival." Jessica smiled. "But regardless of what happens in the future, I know that every day I've had with Sophia since that first night you transported me has been a gift that might not have existed without the hope you helped me hold on to." Jessica's visit reminded Marcus of why he had chosen to maintain direct patient contact. Despite his expanding administrative responsibilities, the follow-up conversations, the chance to see long-term outcomes, the opportunity to understand how individual moments of care rippled forward through years. These connections gave meaning to the statistical improvements and program expansions that filled his days. As the Bridges to Healing program grew, Marcus began receiving requests from other hospitals to help them develop similar long-term support systems. His work attracted the attention of national healthcare policy organizations, leading to invitations to testify before congressional committees about the relationship between emotional support and healthcare outcomes. In Washington, D.C., Marcus found himself in the surreal position of explaining to senators and representatives how a smile and a kind word could reduce healthcare costs and improve treatment effectiveness. When we ignore the emotional aspects of illness and injury, we create long-term problems that are far more expensive to address than providing support during the acute phase, Marcus told the Senate Health Committee. A patient who receives emotional support during cancer treatment is less likely to develop depression or anxiety disorders that require years of additional care. A family that receives grief counseling after losing a loved one is less likely to need crisis interventions down the road. Senator Linda Morrison, the committee chair, asked, "Mr. Donovan, can you quantify the cost savings of these emotional support programs?" Conservative estimates suggest that comprehensive patient experience programs reduce overall healthcare costs by 15 to 20% over a 5-year period, Marcus replied. But more importantly, they dramatically improve quality of life for patients and families during some of the most difficult experiences they'll ever face. The congressional testimony led to federal funding for pilot programs in rural hospitals that lacked resources for comprehensive patient experience initiatives. Marcus found himself traveling to small towns in Montana, Alabama, and West Virginia, helping local healthcare providers adapt his urban hospital model to communities where a single doctor might serve thousands of patients across hundreds of square miles. In Billings, Montana, Marcus worked with Dr. Sarah Whitehorse, family physician who had been treating 3 generations of families in her community. Dr. Whitehorse had limited resources but unlimited commitment to her patients' well-being. "We can't afford to hire dedicated patient advocates like you have in Cleveland," Dr. Whitehorse explained. "But we can train our existing staff to be more intentional about emotional support. And we can mobilize community volunteers who already care about their neighbors." The rural adaptations of Marcus's program proved remarkably effective, often outperforming urban results because of the tight-knit nature of small communities. Church groups, school organizations, community clubs provided volunteer support that was deeply embedded in local relationships and cultural understanding. Meanwhile, Marcus's own children continued to mature with an understanding of service and compassion that reflected their father's work. Emma, now 11, had started a peer mediation program at her middle school, helping students resolve conflicts and support classmates who were struggling. Tyler, 9, spent weekend mornings reading to elderly residents at a nursing home near their house. "Dad," Emma said one evening while they were preparing dinner together, "I've been thinking about what I want to study in college." "You're 11. You have time to figure that out." "I know, but I want to study psychology and medicine. I wanted to understand how people's minds and bodies work together when they're healing." Marcus felt a surge of pride, not because Emma wanted to follow a medical path, but because she was thinking about her future in terms of how she could help other people. "That sounds like an amazing combination," Marcus said. "What made you think about that?" "All the stories you tell about your patients. It seems like the people who get better fastest are the ones who feel safe and cared for, not just the ones who get the best medicine." Tyler looked up from his homework. "I want to be a teacher like Mrs. Patterson. She says teachers plant seeds in kids' minds that grow into their futures." Helen Patterson had become a family friend over the years, visiting regularly and sharing stories about her students with Emma and Tyler. Her influence on Marcus's children was another example of how individual connections could cascade across generations. "Both of those sound like wonderful ways to make a difference in the world," Marcus told his children. "The most important thing is finding work that feels meaningful to you." As Marcus tucked Tyler into bed that night, his son asked a question that captured something essential about the journey that had begun with taking the wrong shift. "Dad, do you think you would have become the same person if you hadn't gotten lost that first night at the hospital?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "I don't think so, buddy. Getting lost led me to discover parts of myself I didn't know existed. So sometimes getting lost is actually finding something. Sometimes getting lost is exactly how we find where we belong." As Marcus reflected on Tyler's observation, he realized that his accidental journey into patient transport had taught him that purpose wasn't a destination to reach, but a path to walk daily. Every transport request, every training session, every moment of comfort offered to a frightened patient was part of an ongoing practice of being present for other people during their most vulnerable moments. The struggling father who had desperately needed any job to support his family had become someone whose work was reshaping healthcare delivery across the country. But more importantly, he had become someone who understood that the most profound changes in the world often began with the simplest acts of noticing when another person needed care, choosing to provide it. The ripple effects of that first night, when he'd taken the wrong shift, continued to expand in ways Marcus could never fully track or measure. Helen Patterson's students grew up with lessons about kindness that they would carry into their own careers and relationships. Jessica Palmer raised her daughter with an understanding of gratitude and resilience born from her mother's survival. David Liu recovered from his depression and went on to design healing spaces in hospitals. Inspired by his understanding of how the environment could support emotional recovery, Marcus had learned that every human interaction was an opportunity to plant seeds that might grow into forests of compassion, extending far beyond what any individual could imagine or control. Taking the wrong shift had led him to the right life, one dedicated to the simple, revolutionary practice of helping people feel less alone during their darkest moments. 5 years after walking through the wrong door at Riverside Medical Center, Marcus stood in the auditorium of Harvard Medical School, preparing to deliver the keynote address at the International Conference on Compassionate Healthcare. The journey from desperate unemployment to national recognition seemed surreal. But what struck Marcus most was how the fundamental principles hadn't changed. It was still about seeing people, being present, and offering hope during moments of crisis. The audience of 800 physicians, nurses, administrators, and researchers represented the culmination of everything Marcus had worked to achieve. His patient experience programs now operated in over 200 hospitals across North America, and his training protocols had been translated into 7 languages for international implementation. 5 years ago, I was a laid-off factory worker who took the wrong job out of desperation, Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium. I had no medical training, no healthcare experience, and no idea that I was about to discover my life's purpose. What I learned is that healing happens not just through medical interventions, but through the countless moments when one human being chooses to see and care for another. As Marcus spoke, he noticed faces in the audience that represented the expanding network of people whose lives had been touched by the principles he was sharing. Dr. Amanda Rivera from Johns Hopkins sat in the 3rd row, having successfully implemented companion programs that had become a model for other East Coast hospitals. Beverly Chen, now retired from nursing but active in volunteer coordination, had flown in from Cleveland to attend. Most meaningfully, Helen Patterson sat in the front row, her current class of 4th graders having raised money to sponsor her attendance. At 68, Helen continued teaching with the same passion that had defined her career since Marcus had inadvertently saved her life 3 decades earlier. The patient experience movement isn't about adding new costs to healthcare, Marcus continued. It's about recognizing that emotional support isn't separate from medical treatment. It's an essential component that affects everything from recovery times to long-term outcomes to staff satisfaction. During the question and answer session, following his presentation, a young medical resident from Boston raised her hand. "Dr. Donovan," she began, and Marcus smiled at the honorary title that had been bestowed upon him despite his lack of formal medical education. "How do you maintain hope when working with patients who aren't going to recover?" The question touched on something Marcus encountered regularly in his ongoing transport work. Even as his administrative responsibilities had grown, he maintained his commitment to direct patient care 2 nights a week, ensuring that his understanding of patient needs remained grounded in daily experience. "Last month," Marcus replied, "I transported a 16-year-old named Alex Morrison to palliative care. He was dying from a rare genetic condition, and he knew it. His parents were devastated, and the medical team was focused on pain management rather than cure." Marcus paused, remembering the conversation that had unfolded during that transport. "Alex asked me if I thought his life had mattered, given that it was going to be so short. I told him about something I'd learned from other patients, that the impact of a life isn't measured in years, but in the love shared and received." Alex had been volunteering at an animal shelter since he was 12, helping train rescue dogs. Those dogs went on to bring joy to dozens of families. His life was creating ripples of happiness that would continue long after he was gone. Marcus looked out at the audience of healthcare professionals, many of whom dealt with loss and limitation daily. Alex died 2 weeks later. But his parents told me that our conversation helped him face his final days with peace rather than despair. Sometimes our role isn't to cure or to provide false hope, but to help people understand that their lives have meaning regardless of their duration. After the conference, Marcus was approached by Dr. Catherine Walsh, pediatric oncologist from Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. "Mr. Donovan, I've been following your work for 3 years, and I want to share something with you," Dr. Walsh said. "My department implemented your companion program 18 months ago, and the results have been extraordinary. But more than that, it's changed how our medical staff thinks about patient care." Dr. Walsh explained that the presence of trained companions had allowed medical staff to focus more effectively on clinical care while knowing that patients' emotional needs were being addressed. "Yesterday, one of our companions was with a 7-year-old during a bone marrow biopsy," Dr. Walsh continued. "The procedure is painful and scary, but the companion helped the child feel safe and brave. The biopsy went smoothly, the child recovered quickly, and our entire team felt better about the experience. These conversations reminded Marcus why the work mattered on both individual and systemic levels. Each patient who felt less alone, each family that received support during a crisis, each healthcare worker who could provide better care because emotional needs were being addressed. These were the real measurements of success. The following morning, Marcus received a phone call that would present an unexpected opportunity to expand his work in a completely different direction. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, Director of Emergency Preparedness for the Federal Emergency Management Agency, wanted to discuss adapting patient experience protocols for disaster response. "We've studied your hospital programs extensively," Dr. Martinez explained during their video conference. "The principles of emotional support, trauma-informed care, and human connection are exactly what we need in emergency shelters and disaster relief operations." Dr. Martinez described the psychological challenges faced by disaster survivors, people who had lost their homes, communities, and sense of security. Often while dealing with physical injuries and family separations, traditional disaster response focuses on immediate physical needs: food, shelter, medical care, Dr. Martinez continued. "But we're learning that addressing emotional trauma from the beginning leads to better long-term outcomes for survivors and more effective overall relief operations." The conversation led to Marcus consulting on a pilot program that would train disaster relief volunteers in the same patient experience principles he'd developed for hospitals. The program would deploy during natural disasters, providing emotional support for survivors while they received medical care and emergency assistance. 3 months later, Marcus found himself in Louisiana, training Red Cross volunteers in the aftermath of a Category 4 hurricane that had devastated coastal communities. The principles that worked in hospital settings translated remarkably well to disaster relief: listening without judgment, providing presence during crisis, and helping people find hope amid devastation. "The techniques are the same," Marcus explained to the volunteer training group in a makeshift classroom set up in a school gymnasium. "Whether someone is facing surgery or has lost their home to a hurricane, they need to know that someone sees their pain and cares about their well-being." One volunteer, Maria Santos, raised her hand. "How do we offer hope to someone who's lost everything?" Marcus thought about all the patients he'd transported over the years, each facing their own version of losing everything they'd counted on. "You don't offer false hope or try to minimize their loss," Marcus replied. "You acknowledge how devastating their situation is, and then you help them identify whatever strengths and connections they still have. Sometimes hope isn't about things getting back to normal, it's about believing they can build something new." The disaster relief pilot program proved so successful that it became standard protocol for federal emergency response. Marcus's patient experience principles were now being used not just in hospitals, but in refugee camps, disaster zones, and emergency shelters around the world. Meanwhile, Marcus's children continued to develop their own understanding of service and compassion. Emma, now 13, had started a peer counseling program that had expanded to 6 middle schools in their district. Tyler, 11, had organized a reading program where kids his age visited nursing homes to read to elderly residents. "Dad," Emma said, one evening while they were reviewing her high school course selection for the following year, "I want to take psychology and public health classes. I think I want to study how communities heal from trauma, not just individuals." Felt pride in his daughter's expanding understanding of healing and community. Her thinking had evolved from wanting to help individual patients to considering how entire populations could be supported through crisis. "That's fascinating," Marcus replied. "What made you think about community healing? All the stories you tell about your work, and Mrs. Patterson's stories about her students, and Tyler's stories from the nursing home. It seems like healing happens best when people feel connected to each other, not just when they get individual help." Emma's observation captured something Marcus had been learning throughout his work, that individual acts of kindness were most powerful when they created connections between people rather than simply providing isolated moments of comfort. This understanding led to Marcus's next innovation, the Community Healing Network, a program that trained ordinary citizens to provide emotional support during various types of crises. Rather than limiting emotional support to healthcare settings, the The network would create communities where people were equipped to help their neighbors through job loss, divorce, grief, illness, and other life challenges. Every community has people who are naturally good at providing comfort and support. Marcus explained to city officials in Cleveland as he proposed the pilot program. The Community Healing Network would identify those people, train them in trauma-informed care, and create systems for connecting them with neighbors who need support. The program launched in 3 Cleveland neighborhoods, training volunteers from churches, community centers, schools, and local businesses. Within 6 months, the trained volunteers had provided support for over 300 community members dealing with various crises. Marcus received regular reports about the program's impact. A volunteer who helped a recently widowed neighbor navigate grief and practical challenges. A trained community member who provided support for a family dealing with a teenager's mental health crisis. Neighbors who organized to help a family whose breadwinner had suffered a disabling injury. What we're seeing, reported Sarah Kim, the program coordinator, is that communities with trained emotional support volunteers have lower rates of depression, substance abuse, and family breakdown. People are getting help earlier, before small problems become major crises. The Community Healing Network attracted national attention, leading to implementation in cities across the United States and Canada. Marcus found himself consulting with mayors, community organizers, and public health officials about how to build more compassionate and resilient communities. As Marcus's work expanded beyond healthcare into community development and disaster relief, he maintained his commitment to the direct patient care that had started his journey. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, he returned to Riverside Medical Center for transport shifts, ensuring that his understanding of human need remained grounded in individual encounters rather than abstract policy. One Thursday evening in early spring, Marcus received a transport request that would bring his story full circle in the most unexpected way. The computer showed Marcus Donovan Jr., age 17, room 418 to orthopedic surgery. Marcus stared at the screen in confusion. His son Tyler was only 11, and his name wasn't Marcus Jr., but as he approached room 418, he heard a familiar voice. "I told them my name was Marcus Donovan Jr.," the teenager was saying to his parents. "I wanted to make sure he would be the one to transport me." Marcus knocked and entered to find a 17-year-old boy with crutches and a leg cast, surrounded by parents who looked exhausted from what had clearly been a long medical ordeal. "Are you Marcus?" the teenager asked. "I am, but I'm confused about the name situation." The boy's mother, a woman in her 40s with graying hair and kind eyes, stood up and extended her hand. "Mr. Donovan, I'm Linda Chen. 8 years ago, you transported my son Danny to surgery. After a car accident, he was 7 years old, terrified, and you stayed with him until he went under anesthesia." Marcus remembered the family immediately, the school bus accident during his early weeks at the hospital. The little boy who had asked if Marcus would stay with him. "Danny wanted to be called Marcus Jr. because he said you were like a father to him during the scariest time of his life," Linda continued. "He's talked about you regularly over the years, especially when he's been anxious about medical procedures." Danny, now 17 and facing surgery for a sports injury, looked embarrassed but determined. "I know it sounds weird," Danny said, "but when I found out I needed surgery, the first thing I thought about was how safe you made me feel when I was 7. I wanted you to transport me again because I knew everything would be okay if you were there." As Marcus prepared Danny for transport, the teenager told him about the intervening years, how Marcus's presence during that childhood trauma had influenced his understanding of courage and compassion. Danny had become a peer counselor at his high school, helping other students deal with anxiety and crisis. He volunteered at the Children's Hospital, reading to young patients facing scary procedures. "You probably don't remember what you said to me that day," Danny continued as they moved toward the elevator. "But you told me that being brave didn't mean not being scared, it meant doing what you needed to do even when you were scared." Marcus did remember saying something like that, though the specific words had faded among thousands of similar conversations over the years. "I've used that advice so many times," Danny said. "When I was nervous about starting high school, when I had to give a speech in front of the whole school when I was helping a friend through a family crisis. Every time I remember that being brave means moving forward despite fear. In the pre-surgical area, Danny's parents thanked Marcus, not just for the current transport, but for the 8 years of confidence and resilience that had grown from that original encounter. You have no idea how many times Danny has comforted other kids by telling them about the transport worker who taught him about bravery, Danny's father said. He's been passing on your lesson for years. As Marcus walked back through the hospital corridors after Danny's surgery, he reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought him full circle. The scared father who had taken the wrong job, out of desperation, had become someone whose influence extended across decades, touching individual lives that then touched other lives in an endless network of compassion and connection. Marcus thought about Helen Patterson, still teaching fourth graders, about kindness, about Jessica Palmer, raising her daughter with gratitude and strength, about David Liu, designing healing spaces that would comfort future patients, about Danny Chen, helping teenagers navigate crisis with lessons learned during his own childhood. Trauma. It's about Emma and Tyler growing up with an understanding that their purpose was connected to how they treated other people. Each person represented a strand in a web of human connection that had grown from one moment of choosing to check on a stranger in a hospital parking lot 30 years earlier. Marcus had learned that individual acts of kindness weren't isolated events, but seeds that could grow into forests of compassion spanning generations as he prepared to go home to Emma and Tyler. Marcus understood that his work would continue evolving and expanding in ways he couldn't predict. The community healing network would reach new cities. The disaster relief protocols would help survivors around the world. The hospital companion programs would continue improving lives one patient at a time. But the core of the work would always remain the same: the simple, revolutionary practice of seeing people during their most vulnerable moments and choosing to offer whatever comfort and connection was possible. Marcus had discovered that taking the wrong shift could lead to finding exactly where you belonged. And that purpose wasn't a destination to reach, but a daily choice to be present for other people's pain and possibility. The struggling father, who had walked through the wrong door 5 years earlier, had become someone understood that every human interaction was an opportunity to plant seeds of healing that could grow in ways beyond imagination. Most importantly, he had learned that the most profound changes in the world often began with the simplest choice: to notice when someone needed care and to provide it. One person, one moment, one smile at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.